Hey, everybody, welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast. In this episode, we are chatting about digital route planning tools. Andrew interviews the people behind the popular Fatmap 3D mapping software program, and we give you the scoop on our newest online course at Backpacking Light, a Trek Planning Masterclass.
Look for me in the mountains where walking has a way of pulling you to your peace of mind every day.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast. Ryan, it's been a while since we've both been on the pod at the same time. What's new?
Yeah, it sure has. I fired up the freeze dryer for the season. So we are, as we speak, we are freeze drying 10 pounds of guacamole.
Nice.
We spent yesterday in the kitchen preparing everything. We went down and did a Costco run down in Colorado and bought tons of ingredients, and it is vacuum freezing right now.
Well, this already we have the potential to get contentious here. Are you a guacamole purist, like just avocado and a little salt and a squeeze of lime, or are you like an onion and a cilantro person?
No, we are not purists. We have adapted a recipe from Ina Garten's Barefoot Contessa cookbook, and so it's got tomatoes, red onion, spices, of course, in it, and lots of lemon.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm not doing really anything new. We just got our first big snowstorm, so I went cross country skiing yesterday, so that
Nice.
was a good time. And I'm getting ready to maybe experiment with some winter hammock camping this year. So
Oh,
that
very
should be
good.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, what are you gonna do for an underquilt?
So, Enlightened Equipment has recently released two new underquilts. One of them is an upgrade to an existing product, and one of them is a totally new product aimed at expert hammock campers. So, we have the new product on its way to a tester right now who's a lifelong winter hammock camper, and I'll be testing the upgraded Enlightened Equipment underquilt.
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's put links to those in the show notes.
Yeah, we will for sure. In the meantime, though, this episode is going to be about digital route planning tools. And this is a really interesting topic to me. This is something that I didn't really know much about until I started working for Backpacking Light. But you've kind of have been using digital tools for a while, right?
I have, and I got into digital reluctantly, right? So we've been doing this for decades now, and so when digital came on the market, a lot of people in my generation were like, "Yeah, I wouldn't do that. This takes away the challenge and the fun of traveling by map and compass." But I've kind of gone the other direction on it. I've realized that digital tools can vastly increase your speed and efficiency when you're actually out navigating a complex route. And man, they sure allow you to do some comprehensive route planning and oh gosh, just like investigating cruxes via satellite aerial imagery and all this kind of stuff. We just never had access to this before, and it has completely changed how I plan routes.
Would you say that there's more pros than there are cons, or does it sort of all come out in the wash?
I think it's going to be an individual choice in what you want out of the trek planning process. For me, it has definitely added um, a lot of value to my process because I like data and I like uh, meticulous planning. And so being able to tap into the vast amount of maps and data that are out there has definitely been rewarding for me.
Well, Backpacking Light has a Trek Planning Masterclass coming up shortly here. Actually, it's already released, hasn't it?
It released this morning.
Okay. And we're going to go into a lot of the digital tools that are available and how to use them in pretty great detail in that course. And we'll talk more about the course later. But for now, what I want to get into is what are just some of the most common digital route planning tools that are out there?
Well, if you're a GPS user, your GPS brand most likely bundled your unit with some kind of digital mapping software. So I'm a Garmin InReach user, and Garmin bundles a an app, well, an application website called Explore, and so that is one that's obviously very popular for those of you who are using an InReach or Garmin products in general. Another popular set is just looking at, online mapping tools like CalTopo and Gaia. Those are two of the most popular ones. And then you get into some of the visualization tools like Google Earth and Fatmap 3D and things like that. And those probably comprise the core tools that are used for mapping and route planning. And then you have all these other digital data sources that I see we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but there's literally an infinite number of tools available now online. So now it becomes this process of selecting the ones that work for you and finding the ones that work the best.
Yeah, and probably we should also mention that there's also an application called Gut Hook, which is sort of different than all the rest, and it's more focused at if you're going to hike a specific trail, it allows you to in the moment see exactly how far you have to go, in your day or between water sources or things like that.
Yeah, and Gut Hook brings up something important too. There's two categories of digital route planning tools, and one is the ones you use on your computer before your trip, and then the ones you use on your phone during the trip. So some of these applications have mobile apps associated with it. Gut Hook being a mobile app, Gaia has a mobile app, and it uses your phone's built-in navigation GPS to help you navigate on the route. And so, you can't dismiss one for the other. They both tend to work together. And yeah, the phone apps that's a big one.
All right, well, let's start with applications that you'd use on your computer. That seems like a logical place to start. So, if you were sitting down to plan out a route, what would be sort of the first couple of steps and the first couple of tools that you would access?
I usually start out with Gaia. And the reason is because it has a really nice, easy to use, elegant user interface. And so when I'm doing route planning, I'm usually thinking about it in three phases, and they tend to iterate between each other. But the first phase is really to create your high level route plan, and I'll start out thinking about my route objectives, zoom into the area where I'm hiking and literally draw in the roughest route possible based on some key waypoints that I may be traversing. So let's say I'm doing a traverse of a mountain range. I might draw a waypoint at the beginning trailhead, and then a waypoint somewhere in the middle, and a waypoint at the end. Literally, my first high level routes have 3 to 7 waypoints in them. They just follow the contours of the land. And so that gives me an idea of, okay, this is the minimum distance that I'm going to be traveling most likely. And then it gives me context so that I can see the overall route in light of the terrain and topography. And then after that, I might go into more details in terms of, okay, what do I really want to get out of this trip? So you identify goals and objectives, and these are high level things, like I want to go fishing at some high alpine lakes, or I want to pack raft this river, or I want to climb this peak. And so as you start identifying these objectives, you can start putting waypoints on the map to identify points of interest. And then once you have those identified, then you can kind of see what sort of access points are around the area, trailheads, trail corridors, and then you start to evolve your intermediate route, and that's the route where you are dialing in your entry and exit points and the corridors through which you're going to travel. And once you're done with that, then it's time to go into detailed route planning. And this is where an application like Gaia or Google Earth really shine, because you can go in and see tons of detail. fly over various sections of your route. I use Gaia and Fatmaps 3D for this. And then you can start drawing in the details of a finer route that allows you to achieve the objectives you want to achieve on the trip, and B, get you the data, and by data I mean mileage and elevation gain required so that you can really do an energy mile analysis and see overall what this effort's going to entail. So I often do two routes at this point. I do something that's easy and something that's hard and ambitious. And what usually happens is that my final route results in some iteration between those two.
Okay, so that's an interesting time saving strategy there, because rather than just doing one route, getting to the energy mile phase of it and going, oh, this isn't where I want it to be, and then having to start from scratch, you've already created a backup plan
That's
essentially.
right. Yeah, I'm doing a plan right now, and I've got a 3-day window to do a trip, and I'm traveling from my house directly into the national forest near me, and so I'll be walking from my house. And as I planned this trip, it was originally going to be, I didn't really have it in mind. I have short winter days and limited amount of travel time I can travel during the winter, and so I originally planned a route that turned out to be too ambitious, and so being able to identify several options allowed me to iterate between those options and select a route that I could be back home in 3 days on.
I think it's worth at this point pointing out some of the features. Let's maybe focus in on Gaia just as an example. I think maybe some people would say everything that you've just talked about could be accomplished on a paper map, with the exception of the digital, um, 3D digital flyover. So, what is it about Gaia that sets it apart from just a digital map? I know one thing I can think of is um, maybe starting out with a lower resolution map to help you kind of get the big picture. And then once you've got your route sort of laid out, you can switch to something like a USGS quad or something with a higher resolution and really look at the details of the contours.
Yeah, my trip planning process really doesn't differ between paper and digital. So when I was doing it entirely on paper, I did exactly what you just said. I would grab an area map. It was often uh, like, for example, in the area where I'm going next, I would use the Forest Service multi-use map, and that gave me a nice big overview of the entire area and access points and things like that. And then, yeah, like you said, as you zone into um, refining the finer details of your route, you can look at USGS quads and higher resolution. I do the exact same thing in Gaia. I always start out with the Gaia base map because it gives the most accurate locations of trails and road accesses and things like that. And then as I create more detail in my route, I will switch over to the USGS topo layer in Gaia or the aerial imagery layer, and it allows me to tweak my route accordingly.
I want to maybe get into the weeds just a little bit here, with Gaia. Do you create your routes as one giant route in Gaia, or do you segment it up into days or segments?
When I am doing initial planning, I will do my overview routes. When I'm creating a high level route, I will do my overview route as one big route.
Hmm.
As I go through details, I will segment it. And I don't often segment it by days because I don't often know where I'm going to camp at night. So I want to leave that option open. And it makes more sense, at least to me intuitively. I know everybody's a little bit different, to plan segments based on terrain and topography. So, for example, this route I'm doing right now, I've got a segment from my house to the trailhead. I have a segment from the trailhead to the national forest boundary area, which starts the mountain range. I have a segment that traverses all along the mountain range. I have another segment that goes from the end of the mountains to the mouth of a creek drainage that I'm going to hike up. And then I have a segment all along that creek drainage, etc. And so um, that's I need to do that because it gives me a good feel for the, I don't know, the almost the psychological tempo of the route, and gives you the ability to visualize it a little better in terms of, you know, what you're going to face. And then once I do my final high level plan, assuming all those segments have all the detail drawn in, then I will trace them all with one master route. And that's the route that actually goes into my GPS, or that I import into Fatmap to do a flyover. And it's really difficult to do that with multiple segments because all these software programs are sort of incompatible with each other, and you need one master GPX file that can transfer between everything.
Yeah, and the other advantage to that is you can see the elevation profile and the mileage for the whole trip
Right.
in one
Yeah.
file. Yeah. One thing I've run into, and maybe you have a solution for this, is so I recently did a trip with a friend, and we planned out our route and did the whole process. And I wanted to share individual segments with my friend instead of just sharing the one master segment. And that is not very easy to do in a batch format out of Gaia. I had to do it one at a time, one
Yeah.
segment at a time, and it was pretty annoying.
Yep, that's true. And so the way my way around that, rather than using Gaia sharing, is I have a separate Gaia account that I can I can share logins with people who are on my trip, and so that we can all be working on the same routes together.
Okay, yep, that's a shockingly simple solution. What are some of the downsides to using these tools?
I think with a pre-trip digital mapping tool, the downsides are not very compelling. And the main thing I've heard is that because there's too much data, you spend too much time trying to refine a route to the point where you're trying to map out every step of your journey. And that is a risk. And I suffer from that as well, especially when I'm doing off-trail route planning, because I like to dive into the satellite imagery and draw the details of my route around visible terrain features that I can see on aerial images. But the the upside is it has saved me a whole bunch of heartache. So, for example, I did a route a couple years ago through the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and it was through a burn area. And I would have never known the details of that burn without looking at aerial imagery and rerouting accordingly. And it has the potential to save you a lot of heartache and headache. And to me, that's a more compelling reason to use digital route planning than the disadvantages of taking too much time or having too much data. That said, there is an art to navigation. And if you don't spend a lot of time digital route planning before your trip, you will spend more time on the ground and when you're actually doing your route. And so there's a lot of reward in that, in and of itself, making real-time decisions about how to get from point A to point B without using digital route planning tools. To me, that's still a very satisfying way to hike, and I like to do that on occasion. So I think it's important to put them in balance and realize that there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And for me, I haven't really found that one is better than the other.
Yeah, a couple of things that I really like is turning on the slope angle shading in Gaia or CalTopo, and it that's not really doing anything that a topo map isn't doing, but it's doing it in a way that's easier to it's easier for my brain at least to look at a glance and sort of comprehend. Oh, okay, this is, this is the general angle of this terrain. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it seems to click in my brain a little bit better. I've been reading topo maps for 30 years. I understand how to do it, but there's something about that color gradation with slope angle shading that I can just look at and go, okay, boom, that's not going to work.
That's one of my favorite ways to plan high level routes, is to turn on slope angle shading and satellite aerial imagery layers, and then superimpose those two layers on top of each other and draw your high level route in from that. And man, what a fantastic way to identify a very efficient route quickly.
Have you ever run into any problems with the information in your tools not being accurate when you get on the ground? I may be thinking especially of like mileage estimations.
Yeah, definitely. I have a model in the Trek Planning Masterclass that I present that considers these factors. And generally, I find, based on what I map and then what I actually record in the field, there's between a 5 and 15% difference in your actual miles traveled and what you plan on a digital map. And usually what you plan on a digital map underestimates what you're actually going to travel. And it depends on a couple of things. The first is whether or not you're traveling on a mapped corridor. So if you're snapping your route to a roadbed or a trail, those tend to be more accurate than if you draw in a route over a trail that you just see visibly on the map with a bunch of straight line segments. The second issue is if you're going off trail, the extent to which you draw route detail in over a satellite aerial imagery layer is going to factor into this mileage correction factor. So the more detail you're able to draw, the more accurate you're going to be. Off trail travel tends to result in traveling higher mileages than what you're planning on a digital layer. And then you've got things like the tortuosity of your route. How many twists and turns and changes in direction are you going to make? The more tortuous your route is, the higher the actual number of mileage you're going to experience.
And I think that there's something interesting psychologically to consider here. I ran into this on a recent trip in the Smokies. We'd planned the route digitally, and then I knew that the mileage wasn't going to quite equal out. So I'd used your model to try to compensate for it. And I found myself paying way more attention to that through the course of my day. Like, oh, how far was I off? What should I do to compensate tomorrow? If I had just been looking at a map and sort of looking at a trail and using the tools on the map to get close to what I thought the mileage would be, I wouldn't have been worried at the end of the day that like, oh, where's the campsite? It should have been here 0.3 miles ago.
Right.
I would have just said, I'm getting close,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that it can mess you up a little bit. And for me, the most valuable part of doing it is just making sure I'm not biting off more than I can chew, rather than paying attention to every tenth of a mile when I'm out there.
Right. At what point should you put the digital tools away and use non-digital resources?
I think there's three scenarios. The first one is when you want to have the tactile, visceral experience of navigating with map and compass, which, as I said before, comes with its own set of rewards. There's a lot of skill that goes into efficient, fast map and compass navigation. And I think everyone should experience that because it puts you more in touch with the actual landscape and kind of gets your nose out of the phone kind of scenario. The second scenario is when the digital tools start to become a hindrance to your efficiency. So you can spend so much time while you're hiking looking down at your phone and making sure that, like you mentioned in the Smokies, every tenth of the mile is tracked and matched to what you're seeing on your phone screen, that it can actually become a hindrance and slow you down. The third scenario is when you need to develop your skills. And I can't emphasize this enough because there's always the case where your digital tools are going to fail or they're going to be impractical to use. For example, using my phone in a cold windy, rainy storm is not an awesome experience. Now, using a map and compass isn't an awesome experience during that time either, but the ability to pull the map out, assuming it's in a waterproof bag and everything, and, keep my mittens on is a whole lot nicer than pulling out a phone. So there is a time and place where your skill at analog mapping is going to be called upon, and we should always be developing and practicing those skills.
Yeah, your phone seems like it's going to fail at the worst possible moment, because those cold, windy, rainy conditions are exactly when you'd need it to not fail the most. And that's when the battery is likely to be sapped, or
Yeah.
it's likely to not boot up correctly.
And I
Uh,
don't want to take my mitten shells off to use my phone.
no. I did have an interesting experience in the Smokies. On our last day, my friend had a knee problem flare up pretty bad, and it wasn't an emergency, but we were like, okay, we need to call our trip a day early and go ahead and get to the car. And I pulled up I'd never used this function on my Garmin Phoenix watch before, but I pulled up the car on my map on my watch and hit the navigate to function. And it gave me, after we'd been walking for a little bit, it gave me an estimate of the time we would arrive at the car,
Oh,
which
that's great.
in that situation, in the situation of trying to essentially extract a wounded member of my party from the park, I would never use that any other time. But having a definitive kind of like, okay, if we move at this pace, we'll be at the card exactly this time. That was very helpful in that situation.
Yeah, that's really cool. I don't always hike with my phone, but I almost always hike with my Phoenix watch. And when we travel, especially to different areas that are not our home area, often we'll day hike or go on quick trips and not know the area. And I haven't had a chance to go to the outdoor shop to scope out trails or anything like that. And so we've randomly found a trailhead, and I've used the maps on my watch to kind of craft ad hoc loop trips and whatnot. And so that's been actually really valuable for me too.
Yeah, it's not the easiest interface in the world. I mean,
It's pretty little.
yeah, and you're working with 4 buttons, but
Yeah, right.
it'll do in a pinch. Well, I want to transition a little bit into talking about Fatmap. In a few minutes here, we'll toss to the interview where I interview the creators of Fatmap, but let's talk about the program a little bit in more detail before we get to that. You're a big fan of this program.
I like it. It's a 3D visualization tool, comes with several mapping layers. The thing I like about it relative to its main, I don't even want to call it competition, but its main alternative is Google Earth, is that it's just a really beautiful, elegant, simple interface to use.
My favorite thing about them in relation to Google Earth is that you can download the app and download maps for offline use and use that 3D interface in the field. And I find that incredibly cool.
It is really cool, especially when you're trying to match what you see on the ground with what you see on the app. And I use the 3D interface for route planning because I think it's really valuable to discover efficient routes. And by efficient routes, I mean ones that don't um, lose and gain a lot of elevation. And then being able to go out into the field and try to match that up has been really neat. Last year, I did a trip in the snowy range in Wyoming and had whiteout conditions. And so being able to pull up the 3D interface in the Fatmap app and kind of see where I was going it was a mind-blowing experience. Actually, it was really bizarre that I was looking out in front of me in real life and seeing nothing but flat white terrain, and then pulling up the interface and realizing I was in the midst of a really complex mountain environment.
All right, well, there's lots of other cool stuff to talk about Fatmap, and I chat about it all with Misha from Fatmap. So let's just listen to that interview. So, Misha, welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, great to be on.
Yeah. Can you just start out by just telling us a little bit about your background, and then maybe from there go into what is the story of Fatmap?
So I guess my background is probably best described as a misspent youth with computers. Grew up maybe in the right place at the right time during the explosion of tech in business, when every business was getting connected to the internet and email, and built my first business really as an engineer out of my bedroom, working with like Microsoft technologies and Cisco networks, and basically connecting businesses. I grew up in London, so was mostly there. Yeah, and it kind of over the course of 10 years, just we were in the right place at the right time, and that went very well. But the kind of how that became Fatmap was after that business. I decided to have a change of scenery, and I moved to Chamonix, and my plan was to become a mountain guide. So started. I'm half Swiss, so started the Swiss mountain guide scheme, and yeah, I thought that was going to be the next thing. And Fatmap was really the product of realizing, like, I guess, like a bigger problem that existed for people to get information and plan stuff in the outdoors, and what started as I guess an itch I had to scratch.
So yeah, that was definitely one of my questions. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Google Earth. And I'm guessing at some point you looked at Google Earth and said, okay, here's an existing thing. I can do this better. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess, like, whilst hanging out in Chamonix, I guess two things were obvious to me. One is that like the whole outdoor market is changing. You know, the world of the outdoors has gone from being this super kind of activity specific thing done by only a few kind of hardcore pros to more and more people want to go and spend time outdoors and in nature and go on their own adventures, right? And at the same time, there's just the whole process of planning one is just, there's a different map for every country, there was different apps for every activity. Like, there's so many different sources of information that's super localized, very analog. And to actually plan something, you just need to pull together so many different sources. And you're right, Google Earth was one of those. But Google Earth was great 3D visualization, but it didn't give you all of the kind of context you needed in a true sense for the outdoors. So like the whole real vision that we had was how do we bring together all of the information you need to go outdoors to make that really just much easier and more accessible for people. And yeah, I mean, the Google Earth question is that Google Earth is a great way to visualize the Earth, but it doesn't have tools for the outdoors. You can't offline it. You can't integrate different national maps, for example, or things like information about like current conditions and things like that, so that it doesn't really become an end-to-end tool to connect the journey from kind of planning what you want to do and going all the way through to navigating on the trail, and then telling that story for other people to discover as well.
So this might be a related question, but what do you think Fatmap does better than anybody else in the 3D mapping genre?
I think it's really the only purpose-built outdoor map that's been built from the ground up, and the only 3D map that's been built specifically for outdoor activities.
Cool. So I think of things like you've got the snow layers that you can lay on top, which I think is extremely handy. We also are big fans of the 3D flyover is so intuitive and easy to use. Can you talk a little bit about, like, was that something that you wanted to do from the very beginning?
Yeah, the fly through was like one of those like just obvious. So the very beginning started with, I kind of call our first product our Tesla Roadster, and the reason I call it that is because it was a super niche product, really only aimed at like hardcore backcountry skiers, and we actually had only mapped 4 like areas in the Alps, right? And so Chamonix was one of them, the Verbier area, Zermatt, and another area around Tignes and Val d'Isère. the reason I call it our roadster is from a kind of technology perspective. It was like all of the building blocks we needed to make an outdoor map. So how do we go and get the right high resolution geographic data? How do we render it on a mobile device? How do we take it offline? How do we build content on top of that? How do we integrate other real-time information sources like the snow cover that you mentioned? And how do we build a community around this? And so the fly through for us was like we designed it as a way you would go and actually as a planning tool to go and visualize the ski line before you went, because navigating on a downhill kind of basis on skis is often more challenging than when you're walking on a trail. So yeah, it started off as a planning and visualization tool, and has now become like more of a relive feature.
Yeah, for sure. I use it for both of those things. I use it as a planning tool for my longer expeditions, and then I use it as a relive feature sometimes on just short runs, 5 or 6 mile runs. It's just kind of fun to see, where I went. And the other thing that I really like is your integration with Strava, because when I get back from my run, I've already got an email in my inbox with a link to the flyover. It's just really cool.
Yeah, it was one of those like small things that we did that we suddenly, like, people said they really liked, and we've just actually done an integration with Garmin and Strava, Garmin and Sunto as well. So now people who can connect those devices indirectly and get the 3D visualization automatically.
So you mentioned this aspect of community, and I know that that's a direction that you're kind of looking towards. Can you talk a little bit about what you're kind of hoping to see from a community on your platform?
There is a destination that you go for most like interests. So if you're a developer, you probably go and build your profile on GitHub, and if you're a business person, then you probably build your profile on LinkedIn, and if you're a DJ, you'll probably have a profile on SoundCloud. And we think that doesn't exist yet in the outdoors. We think Strava is a fantastic platform for athletes and people who value like performance, and really we're trying to build the ecosystem for the outdoors. So what that means is, every kind of participant in the community can represent themselves. So we have like mountain guides are clearly represented, and you can see like the things mountain guides are doing in their local area. You can see who's building content as a local expert in a particular area. And like we really want to kind of keep extending that to allow like every part of the outdoor community to represent themselves on Fatmap.
Okay, really cool. All right, I see. What's your favorite feature in Fatmap?
Oh, what's my favorite feature in Fatmap? Actually, I think my favorite feature is something we haven't ported to the mobile app yet. It's been on the list. Is something that Paulius, who wrote all of our 3D rendering engine, really kind of is the mastermind behind that. And it's a distance planning tool, so you can basically put in how much time you have, and it will show you how far you can go. So it uses a 3D terrain to automatically calculate like a kind of radius that you can go, but it takes into account elevation and other stuff. So it's a feature on the web version.
Oh, I haven't played around with that yet. Wow, that's really cool. So let's go into that a little bit more. So it gives you a well, let me see. Let me think of how to ask this. So let's say you're standing in a spot and you say, okay, how far can I get in 3 hours? Do you give it a direction that you're planning on heading, or like you said, it just draws a radius and you get data from each point of the radius? How does it work?
Yeah, exactly. So you drop a pin at your location. You say how long you've got to go to hike, and then it will draw basically an estimated radius that you can get to from that location in that given time.
So if one direction you're headed downhill and then behind you is uphill, will it take into account the uphill travel? Right.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really cool. So when do you think that might be on the mobile app?
Well, we've been principally focused most of the development on the mobile app in the last while. So everything now is kind of the mobile app is the main experience. We're about to launch a new kind of version of tracking on the mobile app, which will also geolocate photos. I think that's probably like my next kind of, this has been my pet project, I think, from a product perspective, is so that when you do your, whenever you track something and you go and take photos there, you can automatically attach them to the kind of adventure, to the route you did, and then you'll see those photos geolocated on the map. And be able to swipe through them. So the fly through you're talking about, where it kind of flies you through in first person view. Now you'll be able to kind of almost fly to each photo, and it kind of becomes like really a kind of interactive, like 3D storytelling tool.
Really cool. Let's take a left turn a little bit, and just talk about the journey of building this company a little bit. What kind of what kind of struggles have you had to overcome, if any, to get from where you started to where you are now?
One of my favorite Reinhold Messner quotes is, I think it's always longer than it looks. It's always taller than it looks, and it's always harder than it looks. And I think that's probably a pretty apt quote for trying to build, like, I guess what is essentially like the Google Maps of the outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if we knew how hard it was going to be, we would just never have started. Every like all manner of like issues, from where do we go and like acquire the right data, like the geographic data. There's a reason that every major global map platform is basically owned by like one of the large tech companies, because mapping is hard, and the data is very expensive. Just building the number of problems that existed in building the technology, from data acquisition to processing to the cost, were just way bigger than we had ever estimated.
And so was that just, it was solving those things, just a matter of kind of, I mean, to keep with our mountaineering metaphor, you just kind of ground uphill, or did you have to think around corners, or I don't know. We have some listeners who are interested in the idea of business ownership and how to create things, so I'm trying to get at do you have an underlying business philosophy that sort of guided you through this process?
Look, I think there's massive, it's complete, like perfect analogies with building like a business, particularly a startup in an unknown space, and going on like an expedition to climb an unclimbed peak or something, right? Like, I mean, you've only failed when you stop trying. So partly it's also just about getting stuck into those problems a lot of the time. You also need a bit of luck. I mean, for example, like when we realized that the data we needed to have like a resolution of data that was actually useful for the outdoors, when we realized that it cost basically in $84 per square kilometer. So that was great when we were building like this kind of tiny little ski, kind of niche ski apps, the kind of Tesla Roadster I mentioned before. Like, but when you try and build a global outdoor map, which was kind of the next phase of the journey, that you suddenly realize like you need hundreds of millions of dollars just to even buy the data. And we, this was one of the things where we just got lucky. At one of the big aerospace companies that we were buying the data from, we found this fanatical skier who really wanted to help us. And kind of combined with that, one of my early investors and our chairman is Michael Halbert, who was the CEO of Nokia Maps and one of the kind of co-founders of the business that they bought to become that. And so with him and the kind of guy we had in Digital Globe, we managed to basically build the similar model that Spotify has with like record labels, where it becomes kind of a royalty deal, where we're basically essentially sharing revenue based on how much of their data gets used. We turned like what was kind of a complete insurmountable capital problem into basically an enabling feature to build the first like global outdoor map.
Oh, that's a really interesting solution. Does anything else like that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this long list of like probably like climbing most routes. You kind of look up at the belay or whatever, and you're just like, oh my god, how are we going to get over that? And actually, like just by getting stuck in, there's you just end up, for example, processing all that data and actually rendering it into a single continuous global map, which allowed us to combine all of these different data sources, some of the ones you've touched on, from the snow cover to the geographic data to satellite imagery, and making sure they were all in one like format, if you like all compatible with each other, was much bigger than we thought. And we're very lucky to have people like Paulius Likius on the team, who was one of the kind of original guys that built the Unity 3D gaming engine, and just having, I think, ultimately just finding a group of talented people who believe in as much in the vision and what you're trying to do, is probably a large part of finding the answers simply by being smart, but also just not giving up.
So if you've already answered this question, that's fine. I feel like I know the answer, but if you were forced to answer the question, what's at the heart of your company, what would you say?
Look, I think at the heart of it all, we doing this because we really believe in the value of going to spend time in the outdoors and in nature, right? And so we really believe in making it easier and more accessible for more people to do that. I think we also think that that's part of the key of helping more people sustainably enjoy these places. So we're actually trying to kind of become involved in how we avoid the overcrowding that's happening in a lot of places. There is a lot of wilderness out there for people to share, but we also think by helping more people believe in its value, it's more likely to be kind of protected for future generations as well.
Yeah. Do you think that outdoor companies have, well, this is a two-pronged question. Do you do you think that outdoor companies have a voice in issues of conservation? And do you think that they have a responsibility to use that voice?
Yeah, I think all of us, like every actor in that is using the outdoors, or of course, whether you're an enabler because you're making equipment to help people get there, but ultimately also making your living from that. We all have a responsibility to be responsible, right? And so I think we all have a voice that we should make heard. But in the end, it is an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm thinking about is here in the States, we've got some outdoor companies like Patagonia and REI and a few others that are sort of become vocal about social issues lately. And some of those are conservation related and some of them just overlap. And I'm wondering, as a business owner in the outdoor space, if you feel like that is a role that your company should or can take on.
So how do you mean in terms of the when you say the social space?
Well, I think just seeing some outdoor companies use their voice, so their social media platforms, their interaction with customers, to make statements about conservation and or social justice issues, and some customers find that great, and some customers are like, come on, I just want to buy jackets from you. And
Right.
it's kind of an ongoing rolling conversation, and I'm just interested in what you think.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I suppose I'm kind of thinking out loud. So, look, I think at the end of the day, we all have a responsibility to be responsible. I think how far individual companies decide to take that, some have put conservation issues so squarely at the heart of their brand that it's almost actually more important than anything else they do. yeah, and I think, look, I mean, the drive for a sustainable future is I think only a good thing. Yeah, and then how palatable people find like that conversation, or whether they think it like whether you draw the line, whether it's genuine or marketing, I don't know. I think it's not my place to say.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
You know, yeah, I didn't. It's a tough one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, as a company, I think the only things we can do is be really clear, like with ourselves, our customers, you know, our people, what our values are, and you know, be religious about staying true to those values, and that should drive your behavior really. And I think it was our chairman who told Michael, who one of who said something which it kind of always stuck with me, which is, he said you should judge people by what they do, not by what they say. And I
Hmm.
think like in this case, this is like, you know, it's a very appropriate yeah, quote.
So, what is Fatmap doing to live its values?
So yeah, I mean, we, like all small businesses, we're trying to take like small steps like ourselves. So like, of course, sustainability like is at the heart of everything we think about doing. That's in all of our small actions, from like, you know, how we deal with trash at our office to the kind of the people we do business with at a very kind of micro scale. And I think that's what I mean when I say like it has to be part of your values, and then you have to live it across the spectrum. You know, at a kind of completely the other end of the spectrum, you know, one of the ways we're actually designing some of the way search is done in Fatmap is uh, bringing in this idea of trying to distribute people rather than concentrate people. So like, you
Mm,
know, we have this problem where like you know, that you exist in social networks, for example. Like if you have an advertising model and a kind of classic social network model, you know, what happens is the more engagement a piece of content gets, the more it gets served, and the higher up the ranking it gets, so the more people see it, which of course is fine if that's a cool viral video, but it's
right.
not fine if it's a fragile outdoor environment. And so even though someone might have taken a nice Instagram photo, if suddenly, you know, 3,000 people turn up to that place next weekend, that's actually not very helpful. And so we're even starting to design like how we do the search algorithm, so we actually create almost the inverse effect, where discoverability is essentially suppressed once a piece of content gets too 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 high an engagement.
Oh, that's really interesting. Cool. Okay, well, I know you're a busy guy and it's at the end of your day over there in Europe, so we can wrap it up. But I just wanted to ask you if there was anything that you wanted to talk about or say that you didn't get a chance to talk about or say yet.
No, look, I think like the main thing is really, we're really trying to build Fatmap as a platform to bring together like multiple sources of information, to bring people together to share information with each other in like whatever way they choose, and to build tools that make it easier for people to explore the outdoors. And I think that's kind of really the main message. I think probably I didn't speak very well about the community there, and I think our vision there is to become like a lot of the content and things on Fatmap. We've really kind of worked very closely with the community to build, and our long-term vision is really for bring the community to life and enable communities to exist of their own accord on Fatmap. Like whether that's your local steep skiing group, or find other families to hike with, right? And you know, actually one of the things that I didn't mention that which is kind of all part of this kind of ecosystem, is we have a new integration launching with a company called LifePath. I was going to show you wherever it is on video. We're not. So you know, one of the things that's new this year is we've just integrated. So along with the Garmin integration, the Sunto integration, the Strava integration, we're integrating with a company called LifePath that's launching a GPS connected ski pass. So it's designed for kids primarily, so that you can basically put the ski pass in your pocket, and the parents can keep track of where their kids are live on Fatmap. But they're also launching early next year a product for anyone who goes on a venture to put this in their pocket, and the last 10 days, and will basically transmit back your location to whoever you've shared it with, as a kind of safety device.
Oh yeah, that's super cool. Thank you for
Awesome.
your time, Misha. It was a real pleasure.
Cool. Yeah, pleasure. Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too, man. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, that's a cool interview, and one of my favorite things that Misha talked about was they're doing cool things with their community building at Fatmap and their algorithms, and they're trying to approach it in a conscious way of changing their search algorithm so that routes in Fatmap that are super popular show up towards the bottom of the search. What they're trying to do is spread people out in the backcountry so that less traveled routes get more attention. I think that's kind of cool.
I like it. It's a way to discover things that are off the beaten path. It's kind of nice. And this is one thing that I've always appreciated about music service algorithms like Spotify is you put in your matches and it brings up music that you normally would not find because it's not popular. And so that's kind of a cool feature as well.
Well, speaking of exploration, I want to chat with you for a little bit about the Trek Planning Masterclass that just dropped today. You've been working on this for a while. What are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited that this is probably the most comprehensive online course we've ever released. And so the ability to think about trek planning as a holistic, complex exercise is really valuable because there's so much that can go into planning a successful route. And your primary objectives are always, I want to enjoy myself, I want to be comfortable, and I want to be safe. And so the every module we have in this course kind of feeds into those objectives. And so what I've done is I've taken the process that we've used for years now in the Wilderness Adventures program, and I've used on my personal expeditions through the years, and created a methodical framework for planning complex trips. And so the first third of the course really focuses on creating your route plan. And I talked about my 3-phase process of creating a high level, intermediate, and then a detailed route plan earlier in the podcast. And then we bring in all these other things that can really help you dial in your equipment, your supplies, your strategy, etc. So everything from forecasting environmental conditions, how we actually do that online, assessing terrain with 2D and 3D aerial imagery, creating your gear and supply list based on knowledge of your route. I'm a huge advocate of planning your route first and then dealing with gear second. And then looking at how does knowledge of your route inform your strategy for dealing with inclement conditions or emergencies, and what kind of contingency planning should you do. And then we look at how the route informs your hydration plan and your food plan and your energy requirements and all this kind of stuff. So the ability to just bring in all this under one roof and create a process and kind of demystify the art of complex route planning has been really rewarding.
Yeah, and at the end of it, you end up with a spreadsheet, which is a work of art, I think, if you like spreadsheets.
Yeah, the spreadsheet is a great tool. The one we bundle with this course is similar to the one we bundle with the inclement conditions masterclass, but it's expanded a bit, and I methodically walk through that spreadsheet, and it's interesting to be able to see how other people have done it, and then adapt it to my own use. And that's my goal with this course as well. There's going to be, 100 different process checklist items for route planning, and you can pick and choose the ones that make sense for the types of routes that you're planning, and you can adapt the spreadsheet accordingly.
Oh, sweet. I can't. I'm excited to sit down with a cup of hot cocoa this weekend and take the class. I'm excited about it.
Great.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I did not tell you I was going to ask you this, but it's December, which means that you are busy prepping our staff picks article, which is one of our most popular gear related articles we publish all year. Don't want you to give too much away about what's going to be in there, but have you come across one or two things that were new for you or that particularly caught your eye in prepping that article?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I saw was that there are some pieces of gear that are no longer in production, or that have been in production for a very long time and have appeared in people's gear lists and inventory for a long time, and they're still there. And I always find that interesting. One of the staff picks was a Go Light Wisp jacket, which has been, off market for years, but I remember the Wisp. It's a fantastic jacket, and gosh, I love seeing these things pop up. Another one is the RBH Designs Vapor Mitts. That's another piece of gear that's still in my inventory every winter, and just being able to see that someone else has that popped in their gear list is really interesting to me.
Yeah, there's been so many technological improvements, especially in fabrics and shelter design in the last few years. I think, yeah, I would agree. It's really cool that there's gear that just sticks around.
Yep.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Backpacking Light podcast. The Backpacking Light podcast is advertising free thanks to membership fees paid for by the Backpacking Light members. A backpackinglight.com membership gives you access to 20 years of archives, forums, and online courses. So please consider supporting the podcast and becoming a member right now at backpackinglight.com/subscribe.
You can download the show notes for this episode at backpackinglight.com/podcast.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It really does help other people find the show. Thanks for listening to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall.
And I'm Ryan Jordan. And if I can leave you with one party message, it's this: pack less, be more, because lighter is better. Happy trails, everybody.
So I shoulder my backpack, walk away from the